So what would you do if a group of people came in and they gave you money in exchange for something of value that you gave to them, like for your product or service, and then later you discover that they have a political and moral view that you disagree with, like very strongly? Do you throw them out? Do you chew them out and refuse to serve them? Now, I want to talk to you about this because this is a story that's currently in the news. Also, I want to do a quick book review at the end of this because there's a really awesome book that I recently read. So let's go there. So on October 1st, in Seattle, Washington, the group AHA, which is the Abolish Human Abortion, they're a Christian-based group. They were handing out flyers that were essentially anti-abortion flyers, right? Trying to convince people to not agree with abortion. Well, after handing those out on the street in Seattle for some time, they then went into a coffee shop to have some coffee. And turns out that the owner of the coffee shop is gay, and somehow he had acquired one of these flyers. They weren't handing them out inside the shop. Apparently, he found them in the street or something, and he immediately kicked this group out, kicked these people out. And I find it interesting though, because as you look at the sources behind this, they say, okay, AHA, Abolish Human Abortion. That's a Christian-based group. I honestly think that's kind of an irrelevant point, other than it makes a good comparison that we'll go over later. But really, this is a significant thing. That you shouldn't do what this owner did, regardless of whether they were a Christian-based group or a secular-based group. What this owner did was totally uncalled for. It turns out that when he discovered that they were in there, he said, he had a pamphlet, and he said, "This is totally offensive. You need to get out of here. Get out." Like, well, you're refusing service to us? Yes, get out. This is offensive. And he starts cussing at them and starts being actually quite obscene. And I do have to say, I just want to make a really quick side note. I've seen in the video and also in pictures that the pamphlet that he's holding up, that pamphlet shows it shows a little bit of forearm and hands, and they reach out like this, and there's it looks like a small unborn baby, whatever, falling from the hand area. And I thought it was interesting though that the hands were from the forearm down were in the same color scheme as the Gay Pride flag. Now, I'm saying this now because it'll probably will come out later, but also the point I want to make is that regardless of whether or not that was intentional or not, whether that pamphlet actually said very explicitly, that we believe that it's mostly the LGBTQ people who stand for this, or something else offensive like that, regardless, does that really change the circumstances behind that man throwing them out, behind him kicking them out of his place of his business? Does that really justify what he did? And honestly, not really. The way he did what he did, the way he went about doing what he did, doesn't really justify him acting that way, by him being very rude, very gross towards these people. I do have to say though that I thought that in the video, the people are also they're kind of prodding him, and I can see they're probably very much annoyed at someone coming at them like this, and I can understand that. But honestly, you should take this sort of stuff with better grace. Regardless, there's definitely faults on both sides, but there's something that we need to understand here, and that is that regardless of whether you agree or disagree with someone, you can still treat them civilly. These people came into your business and they gave you money for coffee or for whatever else, right? They actually provided your business with the support it needs to survive. And then you go out there and you kick them out, you treat them like trash. I don't believe someone like that should actually be sued in court. I don't. I think that's the wrong way to go about it. I think that honestly, you should let the market take its course. That's really the first takeaway we should take from this, is that you should let the market take its course. So if there are enough people who hear about this who go, I don't want to support that coffee shop anymore, so they stop supporting it, whatnot, and the guy loses money and his business dies. Okay, well then that's a market result. Or maybe because it's Seattle, there's enough people out there who will say, hey, I agree with what he did, so I'm going to keep supporting this group. Well, regardless, let the market take care of it. Don't take him to court. And second takeaway from this is, going back to that Christian thing, I said it didn't really matter if whether they were a Christian-based group or not. But to make the comparison, yes, people have talked about, there's been Christian bakers and florists and photographers. They've been taken to court, sued, and even forced against their their human right to do as they believe, because they were considered discriminatory. There's a really big difference between that and what happened here. In those cases, these people, like especially the baker, they said, they refused service from the beginning. They refused literally to receive money from someone who would happily pay the money, and said, I don't believe in participating in that ceremony. It's a ceremony which they believe should only happen between a heterosexual couple. So yeah, they actually said no to receiving money from that person, but also gave them references for people who would serve them. Contrast that to someone who gets so fed up and disgusted and finds something so offensive that they decide to start being very vulgar towards them and kick them out. There's a very big difference between those two. You can still say, in the future, I don't want to serve you people here, or whatever else, but there's a huge difference in the level of civility and the way in which we act towards each other. And honestly, we can disagree on a lot of different points morally, politically, but there should be a level foundation of how we act towards each other morally in civil society. And that's clearly being, removed, being eroded. Also, I think it's important to have a takeaway from this is that discrimination happens all the time. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. The Army, for example, the Army discriminates all the time. My brother-in-law, he wanted to join, well, I don't know if he wanted to, but he's looked into it, into joining the military, and he knows that he can't join because he has false teeth right here. And then there's a lot of other very, very specific standards or expectations they look for, and they will discriminate. Discriminate really means just to separate or to differentiate. And that happens all the time. You have to do that in order to obtain the quality, in order to do the things that you want. But in these examples where that's not necessarily the case, you're not looking for a certain quality, people are going to discriminate all the time based on their belief system. Well, guess what? Religion is nothing more than your belief system by which you live your life. So that means the freedom of religion, the freedom of religious expression, is not guaranteed to only those who have a particular organized religion. And also, just as a side note, a lot of these political civil rights groups, they are also very much like a religious group in and of themselves. The way they function, the way they promote certain beliefs, and have very exclusivity in their membership. So really, we all discriminate to some degree, but we can't stop every evil. This is really what it comes down to. A lot of these laws, and I talked about this last time, is it comes down to human behavior. Really, what we're trying to do is when we're trying to prevent people, whether it's from shooting other people, or even mass shooting, or discriminating against people who come into your place of business, like, oh, I don't feel comfortable performing that for your wedding, or I don't want you in here because you believe in this. Well, yeah, there's bad guys in all of those, I guess you could say. There's always some sort of bad guy, good guy, whatever else. But we're never going to be able to force people to be good. And the problem is that what good is depends upon those who are on the receiving side of it. So really, it's a very relative term. What is good? What is bad? And regardless, when we start going there, what happens? This is what always happens: is that once we give government the power to take out the bad guys, right? To go after those guys who are discriminating, who are doing something bad. Eventually, if that is not undone, if that power is not taken away from government, eventually and always, it gets turned around on the very people who applied it. It gets turned around on other good, innocent people. We all may at some point agree on who the bad guy is, But as Abraham Lincoln said, that those who control public opinion control the government. The government really does follow public opinion. And if we start to give the government power to take on a certain bad guy, well, that same power will be used against other people who aren't necessarily bad guys. So yeah, it sucks when people discriminate against you. It sucks if you're on the receiving end. If you're part of that Christian group in that gay coffee owner shops in his business, and you get kicked out and they chew you out like that. It's not fun. It's not fun to be discriminated against for race, religion, color, sexual orientation, whatever else. It's not fun. And we should try our best to remove that. However, if people have a private business, if people have their private lives, we need to give them some space to do basically even some evils that aren't violating human rights. And as bad as it sounds, honestly, we have to differentiate between human rights and privileges. We live in a very modern society where we are full of privileges, and we are starting to assume them to be human rights. Healthcare being one of those, now supposedly a human right, which it's not. So moving on, I want to talk about real fast. I want to talk about the. Actually, no, let me backtrack real fast before I jump here. I do want to add this. Talking about discrimination laws, just giving you an example of what I mean by the government being, taking that power and using it upon someone else. In the South, during the racial segregation, the Jim Crow laws, there were actual laws set in place that forced white business owners to refuse business to people of color. They were forced to by law. And yeah, sure, there were plenty of racist business owners, but that was by law. And so when you remove that, that would give people the chance to act morally because they want to be able to survive in business. They want to obtain social acceptance, which, having that social acceptance will allow them to keep having a good business. But instead of just letting that be, the government then, after removing those laws, created laws which just said you cannot discriminate for these reasons. Well, now we are years way beyond that time period. And now we see this huge mess going on with the discrimination laws. So now that everyone somehow is protected under discrimination laws, now certain people, and even in essence, no one is protected. You can't protect everyone. So then who becomes the bad guy? Who becomes the good guy? Where do people's rights begin? And where does the law step in? It becomes very wishy-washy, starts jumping here and there, and then we're gonna have to settle everything in court. And then the precedent set in Supreme Court, even it's pretty awful. We start to get into some very slippery paths there. We really should avoid going down this road. All right, so moving on to the book review. So not too long ago, I finished reading The Fiery Trial by Eric Foner. It's the full title is The Fiery Trial: Abraham Lincoln and Slavery. And it was fantastic. I mean, honestly, I always wanted to know more about Abraham Lincoln, and I wanted to better understand him. And what I learned from this book, really, it just blows my mind. Abraham Lincoln is not who we picture him to be. And I'm not saying that in the sense of sinister undertones. What I mean is, in our modern time period, in our era now, we tend to gloss over, kind of like, oh, okay, well, we forget a lot of certain details and we just put certain labels on people. Go, Abraham Lincoln, great, amazing man, freed the slaves. But really, there's a lot more to it. We see him as some guy who, from the get-go, wanted slavery to be rid of, thought, equality of rights, all those things for blacks. When really, as you read this book, you discover something very different. From the beginning, Abraham Lincoln, actually, he wasn't really racist or anything, but his view on slavery, his view on equality of rights, not just human rights, but privileged rights, those things developed over time a lot. In fact, he was very, very conservative, very cautious, very slow to change his opinion into the opinion that we all see him as someone who believed in rights for everyone. Very, very different than that. But at the same time, if you look at his time period and what he had to do, if Abraham Lincoln were anyone different, if he were someone more on the radical side, the abolitionist movement side, they were considered the radicals, then he never would have been elected president. and we would have had someone else in there. But he was the sort of president we needed, someone who was malleable, not so reshapeable and stuff like Clay that he would change opinions on a whim, but someone who was willing to adapt and change and grow in his views. And also, I find it very interesting because I have this, I don't want to call it a running theory because it's a fact. It's very clear. But something that I understand and believe in a lot, and I talk a lot about on my shows and also my articles, is that religion, organized religion and churches, they have done a tremendous job. They have been crucial to the forming of America and to America becoming more free, more prosperous, and the best nation on earth. Well, as you read this book, you discover that it was the abolitionists, so these churches and also and these organizations specifically that were formed by church-going members, people who based their beliefs and their movement on Christian beliefs. They were the driving force behind the abolition of slavery and the equality of rights for blacks. In fact, they helped shape public opinion to be more for that. And that way, they would willingly fight in the war. They were becoming more, split on the slavery subject. But also, they had a profound influence on Abraham Lincoln through many of their various points of persuasion. So I really recommend you reading Fiery Trial, Abraham Lincoln, and Slavery. It's so good, by Eric Foner. And I'll be back tomorrow with another episode. If you have any questions, go ahead and email or go ahead and put a message below in this in the audio or the video of this episode, and I'd love to get back to you. Thank you for watching. This is the Alex Spicer Show. Don't forget to click the like button, and live free till next time.